Unit 2. So documents or sources for the study of the history of the early West African polities. So there were polities, states that had their own system of government, their own things, the way they did their things. Okay, so they were referred to as polities. Okay, so now this unit looks at these polities. So unit outline, session 1, we'll look at primary and secondary sources or historical documents. Session 2 looks at written and non-written documents. Session 3, archaeology. Session 4, oral tradition. Session 5, other historical documents. And Session 6, historical criticism, the methods for analyzing historical documents. Let's look at units, Session 1 straight away. So Session 1, primary and secondary historical documents. We want to have a look at primary and secondary historical documents. So you are welcome to the first session of this unit, that is unit 2. Here we are going to we are going to discuss the division of historical documents into primary and secondary. And we shall explain what we mean by primary and secondary documents, so you'll be conversant with them. And then we shall also discuss documents that fall neither directly under primary nor directly under secondary documents. So what we refer to as intermediate documents. So by the end of this session, we expect that you should be able to differentiate between primary and secondary documents of history, then explain the nature, types, and specific functions of primary and secondary documents, then discuss the complementary roles primary and secondary documents play in historical writing. Now, primary documents. A primary document, when you say primary document, what do you mean? It's very simple, we need to understand it. A primary document or source is the testimony of an eyewitness, that is one who was a participant in or present at the event. So someone who witnessed the event at which the person says or narrates is a primary document. Activities or processes which he relates. In other words, it is a requirement in history that a primary source is produced only by someone who was a contemporary of the events he describes, somebody who saw it, somebody who witnessed it. Okay. So, for example, an account of the First World War by a witness, somebody who was there when the war was being fought, is a primary source. As would be the diary of a soldier who fought in the war. Yeah, what the person wrote. The same applies to the accounts of the Arabs and the Muslim scholars and travelers. They are all primary sources. Okay. Now, so primary sources, the original documents they left to posterity are therefore primary documents. Do you know that even if the account is biased and contains untruth, it still remains a primary source because it was produced by a participant. So that's why we don't say that it's having these shortcomings, so they are not primary sources. Census reports, photographs, stock inventories, memoirs of army officers in wars, account ledgers, interviews with eyewitnesses, personal diaries, or any other document that was created by participants of historical time period in question are all primary documents. So take note of examples of primary source or primary document. The examples given above are only about written and oral types of primary documents. Material remains such as the skeletons of mummies of humans themselves, buildings, monuments, walls, roads and bridges, statues, reliefs, paintings, inscriptions, coins, and other artifacts like clothing, jewelry, pottery, tools, are also primary documents. Take note, please. These types of primary documents provide definite information about the appearance and the dress of peoples in different places and at different times, and about their technical abilities and artistic standards, according to Caldwell. So written primary documents are divided into two categories. These are published and unpublished. Now, the published primary documents consist of materials such as parliamentary and legislative proceedings or debates, constitutions, laws, and legal documents, reports of court proceedings or court decisions, legislative acts, charters, etc. Decrees, proclamation, reports of commissions of inquiry, committee report, which have been printed correspondence of statesmen and politicians, public diaries, etc. The unpublished primary documents are also made up of manuscripts, whether official or non-official, and uh, these documents, that is the manuscripts, rank high among historians because they contain original information. So these are some of them. Now, these documents, as I said, they are very important in the sense that the information has not been tampered with. Examples are official correspondence, such as letters between government officials and ministries, diplomatic dispatches, secret dispatches, administrative records, minutes of public boards and committees, minutes of businesses and private organizations, personal letters, unpublished diaries, legal business papers, personal notebooks, household accounts, estate accounts, wills, and memoranda kept by individuals. All these are various types of documents which historians consult for data bearing on the topic they treat. You must know that whether published or unpublished, primary documents must always come from people who were contemporaries of the events they narrate, those who saw it, those who participated in it. Okay, again, you must have a notice from the type of both published and unpublished primary documents mentioned above that some are public and others are official, public or official, while others are private or unofficial. Both are very important and we need to use them. Now, secondary documents, having seen primary document, let's look at secondary documents. A secondary document or source, on the other hand, refers to the testimony of anyone who was not present at the events which they account. Somebody who was not there but will tell. In other words, secondary documents refer to information obtained about historical events from primary sources, analyzed and digested, providing an intelligible interpretation of the events. So a newspaper account of an expulsion exercise prepared by a reporter based on interviews with eyewitnesses, but not based on the first-hand knowledge, is a secondary source. All the information in this model you are reading now is a secondary account because it was compiled from documents other than the authors or those who witnessed the events themselves. Secondary documents include books, so textbooks, books written by historians based on first-hand information they had from oral tradition and so on and so forth. Others also include articles in newspapers, journals, magazines, and even pamphlets. In most cases, secondary accounts are produced long after the events have occurred. Now, intermediate documents are documents that do not fall, as we have said, easily into either primary and secondary documents, but are mixtures of both. What do we mean by the term intermediate? I suppose you are thinking uh, that this term is unofficially approved in social studies. No, there's nothing really like that. We have arbitrarily adopted the term to refer to documents whose accounts are neither period primary or period nor period secondary, neither. Okay, so in any case, an example of such documents is an account given by an explorer based on his personal travels and experience, that is primary, and stories collected from other witnesses, that is secondary, and probably coupled with an attempt to reconcile the differing stories into a consistent interpretation, another secondary aspect, which you may think, but not all that significant here. In comparing his histories, Herodotus relied on information from the words of his predecessors, oral accounts of eyewitnesses, together with information based on his personal observation. So Herodotus was the father of history in his accounts that he compiled. Now, the complementary rules of primary and secondary document. In the general sense, we mean that one thing combines well with another thing else, offering something that has different qualities to serve a general purpose. In this context, to say that secondary documents complement primary sources is to say that even though they are of different nature, both primary and secondary sources serve important purpose. Take note of that. Okay, so now that we have understood the primary and secondary sources and having identified each of them, they all complement or they assist in writing history, and that is very, very important. Where trained or scientific historians rely more on primary sources, take note, they rely more on primary sources. For example, Al-Bakri's eyewitness account of the same event, Ghana, Asian Ghana, and we draw on some of these things to get a lot of information from some of these people. So in this session, we have introduced you to the nature, types, and functions of primary and secondary sources. And so you are now conversant with them. Thank you. Let's move on to session 2, which is written and non-written historical document. What are those that we write and those that we don't write? So written and non-written. So welcome to session 2 of unit 2. In this session, in session 1, we introduce you to the types or classification of historical sources. Here, we are going to introduce you to written and non-written sources. That is very important. The types of documents mentioned under the primary, secondary, and intermediate documents are proof that some primary and secondary sources exist in either written or non-written form, which we are going to expose you. So by the end of this session, we expect that you're able to mention some primary and secondary sources that exists either in written or not. Then explain the relevance of written document for the study and reconstruction of the history of an early West African politics. So written documents. Now, as the name implies, written documents provide pieces of written data on events that consider the most obvious and earliest documents from which historians type their facts. We have already mentioned examples of written documents in session 1. So here we are not going to just repeat it, but we know that we know that, or we want you to add a few which I didn't mention in session 1. They include information gathered from written institutional records, university bulletins, university executive, and many others. We have, including even party manifestos, including proceedings and minutes, prospectuses of universities, colleges, and other education, many, including medical reports, party manifestos, dismissal letters, and all that. Other written documents include biographies and autobiographies. We write the books on the philosophy of particular scholars, posters, including those of obituaries, election campaigns, advertisement, billboards. All these are written. That's noted already in session 1 and in the introductory section of this unit session. Written document could either be primary, such as diaries, personal letters, minutes of meeting. These are all written. Minutes of boards and committees and administrative records, or secondary, including articles in newspapers. They are written down, journals, magazines, and books written by historians based on information gathered from documents, such as oral tradition, archaeology, ethnobotany, linguistics, and what have you. Apart from this, there are also traditions which have been reduced to writing. In Africa, such written traditional accounts have long existed in Islamic religions, as well as even Coptic Christians of Ethiopia and Swahili groups of East Africa. Do you think that you can rely on these written sources to study the history of the early West African politics in the 21st century? Truly, you shouldn't consult those of them readily available and are accessible that we can trace to write our history. Gather data and extract relevant information from them. We review them and then we use them to trace the history of the early West African politics. There are specific written documents on African history produced by some writers in the past that are relevant for this course. The earliest written work on the history of sub-Saharan Africa was produced by an unknown Greek sailor in about 100 CE. This work titled The Peripulus of the Erythraean Sea recounts the story of navigation in the Indian Ocean world and East Africa. The Peripulus of the Erythraean Sea. Take note, it was written by an unknown Greek sailor. Then in the 9th century, see, another work produced by a Chinese writer appeared and contributed to the written work on sub-Saharan Africa. This work dealt with the trade between the Far East and the West. Nevertheless, it was from the 10th century that more important written works appeared. Generally, the more important written secondary works relevant to this for this course are those produced by the Arabs and Muslim writers. Arab and Muslim writers. So look at some of these works. The works of the Arabs and Muslim writers are important. Especially between the 9th and the 15th centuries. So, especially the history of the early Western and Central Sudan. So, these Arab writers included Masudi, who wrote around 950 CE or AD, and wrote about the barter of Saharan trade, that's the trans-Saharan trade, in gold between between North Africa and the Western Sudan. Ibn Hakar also wrote in the 10th century. He visited the capital of ancient Ghana, that is, in Bisali, and he wrote. Al-Bakri wrote in the 11th century between 1029 and 1094. He is credited with the first general survey of the Sudan. Arab Muslim writers included Idrisu, who wrote around 1154, Jakat around 1200, Abu al-Fida around 1273, and Umari 1331, Umari 1349. Wrote about Mansa Musa pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century. Another 14th century Ibn Battuta was a Moroccan group trotter who visited Sri Lanka in China and then traveled down the East Africa coast as far as Kewa. Okay, so he crossed the Mauritanian desert and raided the capital of Asian Kingdom of Mali and returned to North Africa by way of Timbuktu, Gao, and Central Sahara. All these people wrote, and we have a lot of vivid information about the life of Mansa Musa and so on and so forth. Especially when Mali was at the height of his glory, at the peak of his glory. Leo Africanus, wrote between 1494 and 1552. Yeah, and he was a geographer and historian who wrote about the history and geography of Africa. And these are a lot of works. Apart from this, we have apart from these Arab writers, African Muslims also compiled works about the Western Sudan, which also they are useful. Some of them were Mahmud Kati, who wrote the Tariq al-Katash, the Tariq al-Fatash, and Al-Gadi, who wrote the Tariq al-Sudan, Sadi, who wrote. So there are some errors here. Mahmud Kati, who wrote Tariq al-Sudan, and then, So the two historical works were composed in the 17th century and made significant contribution to the study of African history that I need to draw your attention. The works of Christian European writers also started appearing as from the 15th century. Those who came here, and as well those who came to the coast. These areas were the Guinea coastland of West Africa, the regions of the Lower Congo and Angola. Those who came here, the Zambezi Valley, and the adjacent highlands of Ethiopia. So from the 15th to the 18th centuries, Europeans such as Kadamus, Babot, Bosma, etc., they compiled the account, what they saw here when they came to the Guinea coast. And they wrote, European writers wrote in Portuguese, Dutch, French, English, Danish, etc. Some of the colonial administrators and other European agents in Africa also wrote. So Carriage, for example, wrote the history of the Gold Coast and Ashanti. from the earliest time to the commencement of the 20th century. Lord Lugard wrote the dual mandate in tropical British West Africa, or mandate in British tropical Africa. Other was Fage, for example, wrote a history of West Africa, an introduction. So all these people who came, they wrote. Samuel Randolph wrote a history of the Gold Coast and Asante in 1895. And Samuel Johnson wrote the history of the Yorubas from the earliest times. So these are some of the works that we have, and these are so Michael Crowder wrote West Africa under colonial rule, about the categories of nation states, a history of West Africa, 1,000 years of West African history, and later with Fade, I Spy, and so on and so forth. Then the development of indigenous trade and markets in West Africa, other works written, Adubu Hanyenko, all roads. Revolutionary years, West Africa since 1800, and a lot of works done. So at this point, what do you think about these major books? They all contribute to the writing of the early West African politics. Now, importance of written documents. Are these documents relevant? Yeah. West African, yeah, so we want to see. One reason is that they can easily be retrieved. You can get them for reference purposes. If they are there, you go to the libraries and they are there. So advantages or relevance of written documents. They are generally, they are more effective means of obtaining data about past events because they are there, that you can lay hand on them, go through and know what happened. They are there. In those days, Timbuktu did not even have its equal. So we have accounts from this, especially direct Alpha and others, and they give us an idea about the things that took place. Okay. Now, furthermore, the eyewitness account of the people of the past put into writing by ancient scholars have helped historians to present of the present to know that Africans were not as ignorant of things that Europeans said about us. Vasco da Gama and his scholars, for example, were astonished by the wealth and comfort they found in East Africa and all that. Again, written documents could be arranged in sequence and analyzed to trace incremental changes or significant things that took place. We can get them. Again, written documents generally give readers more detailed information. You can get detailed information from written documents once you go through them, and they can also refer you to the sources that you obtain those information. So that, please, everybody should mute. So that they also give illustrations through pictures, maps, and diagrams, more reliable names of the main characters or actors are all available that you can see. In addition, written documents encourage people to do further research, so it promotes scholarship and research. Please, kindly mute. Hafsa, Abdullah, mute and tell your have to people that they are behind, so they should join us. Okay, so yeah, and as I said, it promotes further research. Written documents encourage people to do further research. The reason is that whenever researchers and readers find some mistakes or inaccurate information or conflicting interpretation in the existing written documents, they would want to do further research, do further more inquiry, and that is very, very important. Okay. Finally, written information can be found in a book or any other recorded material that can be kept for many years. Okay. Apart from the fantastic thing that you have said about written and advantages of or significance of written sources, there are also some disadvantages. One, yeah, they suffer from several limitations. Okay. Yeah, several limitations. They are not free from bias. Yeah, they are not free from bias. And the information they contain can be incorrect, cannot be fully correct, so it can be incorrect. Written evidence alone affords only a very imperfect basis for the writing of history. Again, facts can be deliberately distorted to suit the purposes of the writer. People can just twist the facts to suit their own interests. Once again, we can make reference to the words of European writers about African past, that Africa did not have history before the coming of the Europeans. How did they get to know? So because of they were biased and from their personal prejudices and so on and so forth. It is also very easy to destroy or lose written documents and easily be destroyed. Yeah, in case of calamities like earthquake, flood, then books and these things can easily get lost since they are normally compact. Okay. Written sources are also expensive. Other historical sources like archaeology, linguistics, and others have to be made use of before written sources can be produced. And so coming out with them are quite expensive. Written sources are generally very scarce in Africa. This is because the art of writing was not introduced early in some part of Africa. And these are some of the challenges that we have. Even though Egypt, writing started in Egypt by started before 3000 BCE and had the hieroglyphics and others. Generally, in most parts of Africa, writing started late. Now, let's look at non-documentary sources. Maybe this module is written, miss it. Yeah, so non-documentary sources. Do you think that it is necessary for researchers to consult other historical documents? Yeah, it's very, very important, and hence non-documentary sources. Now, these are examples of non-documented sources are oral tradition, oral tradition, or oral evidence, or oral history, can say oral history, art history, archaeology, linguistics, ethnobotany, ethnography, ethnomusicology, ethnology, ethnozoology, numismatics, zoology, and many others. These are all non-documentary sources. Okay, so in this session, we have examined written and non-written documents for the study and reconstruction of African and West African history or politics. So we have also explained both documents and provided examples of each of them, and so you are aware of that. We want to proceed to look at session 3, which looks at oral history, hence oral tradition or that. So oral tradition, oral history, oral tradition, information that passes on from one generation to the other. Oral tradition is one of the major non-written, you don't write it down. There are various disciplines in the field of historical knowledge. Okay, so it's a major non-written sources, one of the major non-written sources for the study and writing of African and West African history. So we are going to introduce you to it. So by the end of this session, that is session 3, you should be able to explain oral tradition. Explain oral tradition as a source, identify the 2 major forms of oral tradition, and then at least point out some of the limitations associated with the use of oral tradition. So oral traditions are testimonies of historical events transmitted verbally. So it's through the word of mouth from one generation to another. So verbal transmission of historical information from one generation to another through the word of mouth. This type of non-written source of history has not only provided a lot of materials on the African history, but it is also the commonest source for the study of African history. Oral tradition may take the form of myths and legends, songs, and other forms of music, like praise songs, drum and horn music, folklore, proverbs, and poems. Epigrammatic, yeah, epigrammatic epigrammatic sayings, popular history or studies, stool or dynastic histories, as well as family or village traditions told by court officials or palace officials like linguists. These are all types. So there are 2 forms of oral tradition. I want to put all this together. Now these are face test type and free test type. So the face test type include folk words of folk music, praise songs, dry music, and horn music. Take note: folk music, play songs, dry music, and horn music. This types of these forms of music are passed on unchanged from generation to generation. And you can start example: Dokuya, Obabasia, Okun, Oprem, and meaning Dokuya, the courageous woman who fought before Kano. A horn music played at the Chebi Palace at Achimabuakwa is an example of a feast type. Okay. This land is a historical record of Ochehene Dokuya's rule in the Battle of Akatamanso in 1826. And so Stew or dynastic histories and family or tradition, village traditions are example of free test type. This one, there are some changes in that. In other words, they are liable to changes. They can change over time. Such histories were in the past recounted by court. Are you all right? Okay. Yeah, recounted by or traditions are examples of the free test type. And such issues were in the past recounted by village or by courts or palace officials. So they were those who had it and they narrated them or recounted them, who were officially trained to memorize aspects of the state history. These court officials included the linguists or chairman and the court hearers or Essen and their canisters, the griot in Mali. So these are the people who recounted the past on. Now, what are the significance or the relevance of oral tradition? Oral tradition has a lot of advantages. It is the oldest source of history. In relation to African history, oral tradition provides an important source of information. So take a note. Again, oral tradition assists the other documents, sources such as written accounts and archaeology. They often rely on oral tradition. Okay. Again, oral tradition helps to establish certain historical truths. When several oral traditions are compared, historians are able to clarify all sorts of biases and inconsistencies are removed. Again, oral tradition sometimes carries first-hand information. The participant in an event may take part in its transmission. So they are very, very important here. And such eyewitnesses or accounts are actually relevant. Hello. Good morning. Maybe online. Maybe online class. How could I appropriate? Yeah, so eyewitnesses or artists are usually able to supply comprehensive and first-hand information, and this is an advantage of. These are some of the advantages of oral tradition. Now, there are also certain challenges or limitations associated with the use of oral tradition or oral account. One of them is that, yeah, one of the shortcomings is that because traditions are passed on from generation to generation, a lot of details may be lost. Yeah, so a lot of detailed information will be lost. Oral tradition relies more on the memory, an imperfect and unreliable storehouse of information. Because the changes of memory loss are great, oral accounts may be distorted. A tradition may even represent the narrator's own view about an episode. Yeah, that is one of the advantages. Most times, some important facts are forgotten and others are substituted for them, and so forth. So simply put, the chances of exaggeration and omission are great when we are using this source. Again, people can also trace material to suit or support their purpose, depending on their interests. In non-literate societies, especially traditions undergo a series of changes in order to validate an existing order or informations. Now, this is usually done to gain. Please. Hello. We online class with me now until the later. And then that's the time class. Yeah, so again, oral tradition last sequence. In most cases, the events described in the tradition cannot be accurately arranged. So in their chronological order. So there's problem with sequence. It doesn't follow chronological order. This makes their dating system to be defective. So it's difficult for them, especially deficient when it comes to dating. So they will be associating certain natural phenomena to certain dates, of course, to certain events, because they cannot say that it took place on this date and so and so forth. It is common, therefore, to find such expressions as a long time ago or once upon a time in periodizing historical events. Again, or besides, important historical events are often recorded through the tenure of office of important rulers or associated with major physical phenomena. For example, it could be said that an event occurred during the rule of Oseti the first, the campaign point, or when there was a shortage of salt, something like that. As I rather to the above, okay, there is usually no chronological data of historical developments or events, and that is a very big challenge associated with the use of oral tradition. Again, oral tradition usually contain elements of contradiction. Some traditions contain fantastic tales, which are difficult to establish scientifically. And these are some of the challenges. So this session has discussed oral tradition as a major document for the study and writing of African and West African history. We have identified the two types of oral tradition as first text type and free text type. And we have also looked at examples of each of them, as well as their strengths and challenges or shortcomings. So these are self-assessment questions that you can go through at your own convenient time. For example, explain oral tradition as a source. Say the two types of oral tradition. Discuss four major contributions of oral tradition to the study and writing of African and West African history. And then explain four shortcomings of oral tradition. If you get this in the exams, it's very simple. Section 4 looks at archaeology as a discipline. So archaeology is another important non-written source of history. Today, we know much about the history of Africa and West Africa because of the application of archaeological information in historical study and writing. In this session, we are going to explain archaeology, so look at that. So by the end of the session, we expect that you'll be able to explain archaeology as a source for the study and reconstruction of the history of Africa and West Africa. Then look at contributions archaeology have made towards the study of African history, and then see the challenges associated with the use of archaeology. What then is archaeology? What is archaeology? Archaeology is the scientific studies. Archaeology is a science that studies, human culture. And so, okay, that studies human culture through excavation. And when we want to talk about excavation, we're talking about digging of selected sites to obtain fossils. That will give us an idea about the culture of the group of people who have lived in the place. So this model is saying that it is the scientific study of past human culture and behavior from the origins of humans to the present. Archaeology studies past human behavior through the examination of material remains or artifacts of previous human societies long before or long periods of time. This remains include fossils of humans, food remains, the ruins of buildings, and human artifacts like tools, pottery, and jewelry. So from their studies, archaeologists attempt to reconstruct past ways of life in ancient times. Okay, so remains like bows, arrows, and hatchets usually indicate that the people who lived in the excavated site in the past were hunters and warriors. Holes and cutlasses would demonstrate that they were farmers. Plenty of human skulls and skeletons usually indicate that war and massacre might have taken place. So we have an idea of all this through archaeology. Do you know archaeologists determine the date of their findings? They try to determine this by examining the depth and layers of the objects obtained through the excavations. And so the most important method of determining the dates of objects is the use of the carbon 14 or radiocarbon dating. Relevance of archaeology. Archaeology enables historians to be aware of the existence of high-level civilizations in Africa and West Africa in the ancient past. For instance, archaeological finds have revealed the technological development, architectural, and complex religious systems of ancient Egypt, which started as far back as 2400 BC. Archaeology has also revealed other remarkable sites in Africa, including Begu in Uganda and the architectural ruins of old Zimbabwe. So through archaeology, now we've seen these enviable African civilizations. As archaeology has also confirmed the claims of ancient Arab scholars, of the ancient Arab scholars, that the capital of ancient Ghana, Kubisa, was a twin city, or divided into two, was a twin city. Okay. So without archaeological evidence, it will be very difficult to know all these issues, and that's very important. Again, archaeology has also helped to reveal the rich and precious material culture of several African civilizations. Yeah. So it was through archaeological research that it has been known that the arts and sculpture of the Ife and Benin were all revealed through the works of archaeologists. Further, it was through archaeological works that it became known that human history in Africa dates from the ancient past. So Dr. and Mrs. Leti discovered the fossils of the first human creatures in 1959 at a site in the Odubai Gorge in northern Tanzania. They are the earliest evidence of human culture in the world. Hence, Africa is the origin of man, all human beings. This has come to light through the work of archaeology. Archaeology also promotes the interdisciplinary approach or interdisciplinary study of African history. It helps in the study of plants in a particular environment, okay, botany and all that. So that is it. It also helps in revealing the coins, that is numismatics. And then, so through archaeology, we're able to consult other relevant disciplines when they come across them in the excavation. And that's very relevant. Archaeology has been a particularly useful ally of history in the areas of dating. Yeah, so we mentioned the carbon date 14 dating method. So there are types of dating, relative dating and absolute dating. Again, archaeological findings have also helped to clarify that occupational divisions of labor has existed in Africa long time, and that is it. Most archaeology has also helped to take care of what other sources have not been able to do. In spite of all this, there are some limitations. One is that climatic conditions and the acidic nature of the soil of many parts of Africa affects the fossils, so that doesn't take long in time for them to be able to tell more about the history of the kind of people who live there, their culture. Parts of Africa and other parts of tropical Africa have not left many reserves. Much of the material things revealed through archaeology are also lost in poor climatic conditions. Okay. Another shortcoming of archaeology is that it produces limited account of makers of tools and objects. Yeah. It is unable to supply adequate information about the language spoken by the makers of the objects, their socio-political organization, and their race, whether they were black or white. No. Because this, if they come across a bone, how would they say that this bone was a white or black? No. And they could not also, yeah, it's difficult for them to do that. And because the object that they come across cannot narrate their own stories, so they base their interpretations or their conclusions on 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 just yeah, they actually based on their interpretations through their personal training. So they're able to, of course, assumptions and all that, because they cannot be sure, since the bones, since the thing they discovered, the fossil cannot narrate their own story. Imagine they come across a bone and the bone starts talking, they will even run away. So do that. It's not possible that a bone could start narrating a story, and so they base their claims on yeah, interpretations and their assumptions and so on and so forth. Furthermore, we cannot get a complete account of people's cultural history through archaeological objects. No, we can't do that. There are some of the things that we may not get. Next comes the problem of interpretation, what the objects discovered were used for. So how do you interpret it? So based on assumptions, whether those things will be true or not is also a pitfall. Again, you must also know that accurate dates, as you stated above, are not used in archaeology. Since with the carbon dating is always approximate, it is difficult to rely on dates given by archaeologists. So approximate dating, relative dating, and all that. It's only It is only material found at a particular place that is dependent upon. Attempt to dig up several areas appear very expensive. Okay. And another issue is also that the use of archaeology is very expensive because you may need experts, and archaeologists are even experts. They are professors and doctors. Apart from that, you may need machines and tools, bulldozers and excavators and all that. So you know that if you use the use of archaeology is very, very expensive. In this session, we have discussed archaeology as a major document for the study of African and West African history. We have explained what archaeology is. We have examined the ways in which archaeology has contributed and it still contributes to our historical understanding of African and West African history. We have also, we have also identified the problems associated with archaeological data. I believe that with the knowledge you have acquired, you will be very cautious in using archaeological data in your research. Okay, these are self-assessment questions that you can go through when you are doing your revision or going over again. Now let's look at section 5. Other relevant historical documents. We have ethnobotany. And botany is very simple. It's a scientific study of plants in an environment. And so we are saying that we use interdisciplinary method or approach, and that is that the historian must contact other relevant disciplines. Because if you are writing history of Ghana, you are studying the history of Ghana or history of West Africa, you cannot, a historian, you cannot know plants. You cannot be so conversant with all plants, whether they have internal or external origin. You cannot know all animals, whether they have internal or external origin. You cannot know music. So you understand? So you need to fall on these relevant disciplines. That is very important. That's why I say that you have to adopt the inter or multidisciplinary approach. And these are relevant disciplines that you need to contact them for knowledge. These documents provide data to show when and how a particular food crop was introduced into an area, botany. It can also prove whether or not cultivation of certain crops are indigenous to Africans or not. It is through ethnobotany that we have come to know that yam cultivation in West Africa started at the Dahomey Gap in the modern Republic of Benin. Yeah. Ethnobotany cannot tell us much about other aspects of African history, though. The study of plants cannot tell us about the administration of rulers and all that, but then they supplement our knowledge. Then we also have ethnography. And this is another non-documented source. This type of non-written document involves the study of present-day institutions, including rituals and festivals, as well as the crafts and artistic skills of the peoples. The study of these institutions enables historians to gain better understanding of the past. Ethnography enables us to know more about the cultural practices and strategies of our ancestors. By helping historians to understand present-day traditional, technological, social, and political arrangements, ethnography provides historians with useful ideas for understanding and explaining the past. For example, African rituals and festivals are more often than not the reenactment or playback of historical events. The Hopochocho Festival of the Anlo people tell us about their journey from Nochi in Togo, where they were under the tyrannical rule of Agokoli. Okay. Then other things, the Homo and so forth. Then ethnomusicology also looks at the people's music, the study of the changes that take place in the musical forms of the people, that the people's music, changes that take place in their musical form. These changes take place over a long period of time. For example, the Fante war songs resemble those of the Bon. And so you see that their migration, that will take you an idea that they migrated from Bon. Okay. The Gan musical forms also suggest that the Gan borrowed much from the Guan and the Akan. So all these are some. So music and musicology are very crucial. Then we have linguistics, which is another source of African and West African history, and is the scientific study of the origin, where the language originated, origin, structure, and changes of languages and their relationships. So that falls under linguistics. Through such studies, historians compare historians compare through such studies, historians compare features of different languages or groups of languages that have developed over time from a common parentage or ancestral language referred to as proto language. That's the original language that they have all these things here. Okay. Now, through linguistics, they are contributed a lot, and through that, these languages, through the study of these languages, that linguists are able to classify many West African languages into the Kwa and the group subfamilies. So they can the Ghana Dango Airway. Those in southern Ghana, they belong to the Kwa. And that is of the Niger Congo, while the Guma, the Grusi, and the Modagwani belong to the group of languages. And that is very important. A linguist of the study of Bantu languages, that is the Bantu languages of the East Central and Southern Africa, and the relationship to some of the West African languages have shown that all developed from the Proto Bantu civilization around the Benue River region in modern Eastern Nigeria, and this has helped to establish the origin of the Bantu in the Congo-Niger area. The knowledge about that most people speak languages that belong to the same language family, no doubt demonstrates that the peoples of Africa not only have historical and cultural links through the ages, but may in fact not be as far apart from as existing ethnic and dialectical differences may tend to suggest. And this gives an idea about, we know that the Ga and their language migrated together because of linguistics. Okay. And numismatists also look at languages, scientific study of languages. As I said, linguistics deals with languages, so numismatists also deals with coins, scientific study of coins. That is numismatics, and it's very crucial so far as coins are concerned. So numismatics is concerned with the collection of coins, scientific study of coins. It also deals with all matters relating to coins. So from the study of coins, historians are able to know how certain states and kingdoms in Africa possess mints several centuries ago. Now we have been able to establish kinship lists for the city of Kewa through numismatical studies. So numismatics are experts that study coins of a group of people. And we know that there was trade relation between the Chinese and the people of East Africa through the study of numismatics or numismatical studies. Then serology looks at the blood types and skin pigmentation. So it's a scientific study of blood types and skin pigmentation. Human blood varies in composition from one individual to other. So some genes are present in some people, but absent in others. And through serology, we know that the Kru people are devoid of sickle cell traits. Yeah, so we should. I told that one day, and there, from one year number, you should come around. Sorry, one of them is the so-called sickle cell traits. Okay, now through the study of serology, we know that the Kru of Liberia are they do not have sickle cell trait in their blood because they do not marry outside. They do not marry outsiders. Okay. Historians have been trying lately to see whether they can find out about migration patterns by studying bird groups. Anyway, but the Kru people, as I've already said, they are devoid of sickle cell trait, and this came to light through the study of serology. Take note of that. Very, very important contribution that serologists have made to knowledge. Okay. So in this session, we have explained other non-written documents of African history. They are all relevant. So linguistics, numismatics, serology, and others vital for the study of West African and African history. Okay, so these are self-assessment questions that you can go through at your own convenient time when you are doing revision, and that's very, very important here. The last session looks at historical criticism, and so we'll look at that. Okay, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir. Please, we can hear you.
So let's look at the last session, historical criticism. How do we analyze historical documents? This is it looks at how you'll be able to analyze historical documents so that you know what is truth. You can be able to sift the good or the truth from the falsehood. And so we are going to expose you to historical criticism to assist historians in their way of analysis of historical documents before using them in their writing. Now, this process is sometimes referred to as source analysis or documented criticism or historical critical method. No problem. They are all talking about the same thing. So we have external criticism. And this one, do you have any prior knowledge about external criticism of historical documents? External criticism examines the outside aspects of historical documents, so the outside ones. You need to look at that one. Document to find out if the data of research are acceptable as evidence. You look at that one. It deals with such matters as the authorship of documents. So who wrote it? And the character and the competence of the author. Do they really qualify to do that one? All these questions. It does this with the intention of obtaining all possible information of relevance about the issue. And that is internal. It involves finding out issues relating to where, when, why, and by whom the document was written. That's all the most important thing here. Now, so the genuineness of document can be detected through a number of ways. Forgeries are usually betrayed by the physical characteristics of the document. So we need to check if they are forgeries or not anachronistic. For example, if you say that this thing was there at this time that it was not even invented, it was used. And for example, a document written in ink at the time that even ink pens had not been invented is anachronistic. And these are examples. So the historian can also examine styles of handwriting or the signature in order to establish the authorship of the who wrote it. You can look at people's handwriting to see. A critical examination of the uses of vocabulary inappropriate to the time when a document was supposedly written can also detect. You can join that. In the evaluation of the authorship or of the authenticity of archaeological remains, such as tools, similar consideration apply. It is generally assumed that things found on the surface of the earth are modern or recent, as are objects found in the caves of certain geographical structures. So these assumptions are based on our knowledge of physical processes, such as the actions of glaciers, winds, tides, and so on. Yes, Okay, so let's look at internal criticisms. So internal criticism, on the other hand, is interested in determining the meaning and trustworthiness of statements or assertions or contents of a document. So internal, the meaning and trustworthiness of it. Here, the inquiry examine the language, look at the language, the purpose, and the social setting in which documents originated. That is the most important. The inquiry seeks to find out the original meaning of the text. So what does it mean? What it had meant to its first readers, and not what it might mean to modern readers. The investigator must make sure that he understands the contents of a statement he intends to use. So you must understand. He must avoid reading into a statement a meaning which the maker did not intend. You don't have to do that. The historian's quest is for a fact, and as a critic, he must ascertain whether a statement means what it says. The concern here is to place texts in their historical context and to argue that the present world would misunderstand them if the present takes them to mean something they could not have meant for their first readers. And that is so. In fact, the issue of restoring the original meaning of words and statements in documents is very crucial to historical construction, and it's helped us to be able to come out with the original meaning and trustworthiness of things. There are many reasons why the researcher should doubt words and statement of authors until he has enough evidence to support their authenticity. One, the maker of a statement may or may not have witnessed the events. He may have lied deliberately. Again, in view of the possibilities of error, the student should doubt every statement. You have to doubt it. And again, the truthfulness of statements can be tested by the investigator in various ways. You can do that. You can inquire to see whether the maker of the statement had special interest or not. Or these are some of the things. A person who is accused of wrongdoing can hardly be expected to admit the truth. And these are all the things that we should consider. Bias are also present. Biases are present in many accounts, regardless of how hard the writer tried to avoid them, because all writers are limited by their experiences and preconceptions, their influence on their personal interests, and so on and so forth. Some writers have biases with limited impact on most of their reporting, and others are skilled at recognizing and overcoming much of their biases. The works of other writers, however, are sometimes permeated with biases that have profound effect on the reliability of what they report. So the biases and other circumstances affecting a document must be considered by a historian using that document to determine the genuineness of statements in historical documents. The historian must ask certain important documents. You must ask certain important questions. Yeah, I think this is an error, so correct it. The student must ask certain important questions. Was the eyewitness physically in the position to observe the incident? Was the eyewitness biased? Did the witness have a vested interest in the issue at stake? Had the witness read other accounts before presenting? And all these are some of the important questions that we need to ask. Now, so documents may have portions that are of little historical value because of their considerable biases, while other portions may be highly reliable. Now, do you understand the focus of internal criticism? In the analysis of historical documents, we must look at the meaning and trustworthiness. Can you tell the difference between internal criticism and external criticism? Discuss the differences between the two methods of analyzing historical documents. In this session, like the last session, session 6, we have exposed you to the concept of historical criticism. It has informed you that historical criticism refers to the practice of analyzing historical documents before using them in historical writing. The main idea behind historical criticism is to avoid the use of false data in historical writing. The session has also made you aware that historical criticism is divided into two components, internal and external. You are now aware that whereas external criticism examines the external features of historical documents, internal deals with the content of HIS206 documents. I believe that what you have learned from this session will help you to be more critical of HIS206 data in your research and writing projects or in your study of African history. There are some self-assessment questions here. Okay, that is exercise 2.6. That at your own free time, when you are going over the units and the sessions again, then you try your hands on them. And this juncture, I will pause here. This is the end of session 6 of unit 2, and invite questions that you have put down, all the questions that you have, all the questions. Yeah, so you come out with them, ask your questions, and I'm ready to respond or to answer the questions. Okay, so questions time. I'm inviting questions from almost all of you, so you can ask your questions, please. Apostle Nana Kwanzaa, will you be the first person to set the ball rolling by asking your question?
Hello there.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Forgive me, I joined while I was on the altar, so I'm on my way home.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so, okay. Let's have questions from you, please. Kosti. Faustin, are you with me here or you have left?
No, I'm here, please.
So you and your people, I'm inviting questions from you, please. So that you end for those of you who want to go and eat, can go and eat. Yes, please, questions. Oral tradition, archaeology, and then the documented source advantage, they are clear, they are very simple. But any question that you have, what you wish you want clarity, I'm here with you. It's because of you that I'm here. So that's why we take you to the model. Otherwise, we have lectured, but the model we take you through and ask you that ask questions so that I can go over. And okay, so yeah, if you have any question, then you ask. If not, you don't have any question, then I will say that.
We don't have
yes, go ahead.
I was about to say that it's better you continue because we don't have any question. For instance, I don't have any question for now.
Okay, good. If you don't have any question for now, then we are at the end of session 6 of unit 2. So we may end here for now. And I think we'll meet next time for the last session 6, unit 3. The unit 3, we'll find time and go to unit 3. Now that we have gone through unit 2 and all the 6 sessions, we would end here. And then another time, we'll go through unit 3 and the 6 sessions so that you write your quiz 1. Okay, so go over, and if you come across any question, you can put it down. When we meet next time, you can ask for clarity. Okay. So for still in your group, if you don't have any question, then we end here for now and continue at another time. I wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
sir. Bye.